Karoline Leavitt stood quietly before Judge Anthony Brooks, hands clasped firmly behind her back. Her posture was steady, eyes sharp and unflinching. "You are fined $10,000 for contempt of court," Brooks snapped, voice echoing coldly through the courtroom. Gasps rippled through the crowded gallery. The prosecutor smirked slightly, exchanging satisfied glances with his team. But Karoline did not move. She barely blinked. "I refuse," Karoline replied calmly, her tone unwavering. Judge Brooks paused, his jaw visibly tightening. "Excuse me?" he demanded, leaning forward. The courtroom froze, every breath held in anticipation. "I refuse to pay this fine," Karoline repeated, louder, with authority resonating through every word. Her shoulders squared. "Because your ruling is unlawful." Murmurs erupted into a wave of voices. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively, hand hovering near his side. Judge Brooks's cheeks flushed red with anger, eyes narrowing. "You dare challenge my decision in my courtroom?" Karoline's eyes locked fiercely onto his. "Not only do I challenge it, Your Honor, but I'm fully prepared to prove your entire decision-making process was compromised." Brooks slammed his gavel violently. "Enough!" "Bailiff, remove her immediately." But before the bailiff could move, Karoline raised her voice again, cutting through the chaos. "The court's evidence was falsified, Your Honor. I have irrefutable proof." A stunned silence swallowed every sound. Judge Brooks's eyes widened, anger slowly replaced by something else. Fear. Karoline took a step forward, voice lowering dangerously. "You have just fined the only person capable of exposing the corruption inside this very courtroom." All eyes swung back to Judge Brooks, whose trembling hand still clutched the gavel. In that moment, he knew he'd made a catastrophic mistake. 4 hours earlier, Karoline Leavitt walked into the courthouse, breathing steadily to control her racing heart. The marble floors echoed sharply beneath her shoes, the air thick with tension and the scent of polished wood. She was not new to courtrooms. In fact, she thrived in them. But today was different. Today she carried evidence powerful enough to topple reputations, including Judge Anthony Brooks, one of the most influential figures in Boston's justice system. As Karoline approached, whispers traveled along the corridor. Eyes turned discreetly, watching her every movement. Her posture remained rigid and composed, masking the pressure pressing against her chest. "Ms. Leavitt," a voice called out, dripping arrogance. Karoline turned slowly. Standing near the courtroom entrance was Assistant District Attorney Marcus Reed, smirking confidently. His tailored suit matched his carefully calculated charm, both masking something darker beneath. "Are you prepared to lose again today?" Reed asked smugly, adjusting his silver cufflinks casually, his eyes taunting. Karoline refused to rise to his bait. "Overconfidence never ends well," she replied, voice steady, unwavering, refusing to grant him the satisfaction. Reed chuckled softly, stepping closer. "Brooks will bury your evidence, and after this embarrassment your career will never recover." Karoline's fingers tightened around her briefcase handle, her knuckles whitening slightly. She inhaled sharply, forcing her pulse steady. "Justice has a strange way of surfacing when least expected," she replied evenly. Reed's smile faltered briefly, revealing a flicker of unease beneath his carefully crafted facade. "Justice?" he scoffed, leaning forward slightly. His voice lowered dangerously, words dripping venom. "You are naive if you think justice rules this court." Karoline refused to break eye contact. "Today it will—" Before Reed could respond, the courtroom doors swung open abruptly. Judge Anthony Brooks strode out, authoritative, imposing. His reputation preceded him, cold, unyielding, merciless. The entire hallway fell silent, tense and respectful, a fearful reverence held for the man who controlled careers, reputations, and even lives with a single verdict. Karoline watched carefully as Brooks's gaze found her, lingering just long enough to deliver a silent warning. His expression betrayed nothing, yet she sensed the threat hidden beneath his calm exterior. "All rise," the clerk announced sharply, drawing attention back to the reality awaiting them inside. Karoline entered the courtroom, its heavy wooden doors echoing shut behind her. Immediately, the weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the walls closed in around her, amplifying her heartbeat. Brooks sat at his elevated bench, eyes sternly scanning papers, posture rigid with a sense of unshakable authority. Beside him, Reed relaxed confidently into his chair, certain of victory. Karoline's pulse quickened subtly. The courtroom was stifling, filled with tension so thick each breath felt strained. She slowly arranged her documents, feeling the scrutiny from dozens of eyes fixed upon her every move. Brooks glanced toward her again, a faint, dismissive curl forming at the corner of his lips. She felt the full weight of his arrogance. He believed she posed no threat. His error would soon become evident. "Counsel," Brooks's voice boomed through the courtroom, smooth yet authoritative. "Present your evidence carefully. I have little patience for theatrics." Karoline lifted her chin slightly, matching his intensity with composed resolve. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the truth will speak for itself." A slight narrowing of Brooks's eyes was his only reaction, but Karoline saw clearly. He was uncertain, troubled, and for the first time, Judge Anthony Brooks began to suspect Karoline Leavitt was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Karoline slowly approached the witness stand, deliberately placing a folder labeled "Confidential" onto the polished wooden surface. The room fell quiet, every gaze fixated on her deliberate movements. Judge Brooks watched closely, his lips pressed tightly into a thin line, fingers tapping restlessly on his gavel. Anthony Brooks was accustomed to unwavering respect in his courtroom, a man whose decisions rarely faced challenge. Yet today, something felt different. Something in the way Karoline stood there, unafraid, composed, unsettled him. "You may proceed, Ms. Leavitt," Brooks said calmly, masking the slight tremor in his voice. Karoline nodded once, turning sharply to face Detective Andrew Hale, seated uneasily in the witness chair. Hale shifted nervously, the muscles in his jaw twitching slightly as Karoline approached. "Detective Hale," she began clearly, "did you personally verify the authenticity of the documents you presented earlier in this trial?" "Of course," Hale answered curtly, avoiding her piercing gaze. Karoline tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Then you stand by your earlier statement that my client, Michael Reeves, was directly involved?" "Yes," Hale replied, voice wavering almost imperceptibly. His fingers tightened around the edge of the witness stand. Karoline paused purposefully, allowing the silence to intensify. "Interesting," she said softly, stepping closer. "Because your signature on this evidence—" She lifted a document slowly, clearly displaying Hale's name. "Appears to have been forged." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Hale's eyes widened, his chest rose and fell rapidly, visibly struggling to maintain composure. Judge Brooks interrupted sharply. "Careful, Ms. Leavitt. Accusations require substantial proof." Karoline did not flinch. "Indeed," she answered calmly. "Allow me." She placed another document down, sliding it directly in front of Detective Hale. Is this your handwriting, detective? Hale hesitated, beads of sweat beginning to form across his forehead. He swallowed dryly, eyes scanning rapidly. I am not sure. Brooks shifted in his seat, unease slipping past his mask of authority. Answer, detective, he ordered sharply. Hale's voice dropped to a near whisper. I cannot confirm. Karoline raised an eyebrow slightly. You cannot confirm your handwriting? Judge Brooks interrupted sharply. Ms. Leavitt, what exactly is your point? Karoline calmly lifted another page from the folder, holding it up deliberately for the courtroom. This evidence, provided by Detective Hale, convicted my client, but the handwriting on these documents, supposedly Hale's, do not match. The room erupted instantly in murmurs, confusion and shock, filling every corner. Judge Brooks's expression hardened immediately. Ms. Leavitt, control your allegations. She turned slowly to Brooks, unwavering. This is not an allegation, Your Honor. It is a fact. Detective Hale sat frozen, panic visible now, knuckles white from gripping the chair tightly. Karoline continued, voice controlled yet powerful. This evidence was intentionally falsified, and someone in this courtroom allowed it. Eyes darted toward Judge Brooks, who visibly bristled, eyes narrowing in anger. This is outrageous, he snapped, voice betraying his hidden fear. Ms. Leavitt, you are dangerously close to contempt. Karoline stood her ground, unwavering. What is outrageous, Your Honor, is sending an innocent man to prison based on lies. Judge Brooks's breathing quickened, and his gavel hovered dangerously above its wooden block. His voice lowered to a warning tone. I suggest you tread carefully. But Karoline pressed further, her voice cutting through the mounting tension. The court deserves to know who ordered Detective Hale to fabricate these documents. Detective Hale's face turned pale. He looked pleadingly toward Reed, who subtly shook his head, warning him to remain silent. Karoline saw the exchange clearly, seizing the opportunity immediately. Mr. Reed, Karoline pivoted sharply, perhaps you can explain? Reed laughed dismissively, feigning confidence despite the subtle tightening of his jaw. These accusations are baseless theatrics, a desperate move by a defeated lawyer. Karoline smiled calmly, unfazed. Then perhaps you'd care to explain your phone records from May 15th? Reed froze. His confident demeanor faltered noticeably. The courtroom went completely silent, holding its breath as Karoline withdrew another carefully marked document from her folder. These records, she said clearly, voice echoing through the courtroom, show calls made from your phone to Detective Hale 24 hours before my client's arrest. Reed's jaw clenched tightly. I refuse to... Karoline quickly interrupted. You do not have to speak. The records already speak clearly. 7 calls between you and Hale the night before my client's arrest. Each call lasts precisely 3 minutes. Why? Reed opened his mouth but produced no words, panic creeping into his eyes. Judge Brooks intervened forcefully, sensing the courtroom slipping from his control. Ms. Leavitt, cease immediately. This is not the place. But Karoline boldly countered. This courtroom is precisely where the truth belongs. Brooks slammed his gavel furiously, voice shaking slightly. You will cease immediately or you will face consequences. Karoline stood taller, her voice unwavering. Justice does not bend to threats, Your Honor. Brooks's knuckles turned white around his gavel, jaw set rigidly, fighting for control. One more word, he seethed, and you will face contempt charges. The room waited breathlessly. Karoline's heartbeat thundered in her chest, yet she appeared composed. She considered the stakes and the cost, and then made her choice. "I will gladly face contempt charges," she declared, voice resonating through every corner of the room, because this trial was rigged from the start. Brooks exploded, hammering the gavel repeatedly. "Enough!" "Ms. Leavitt, you're fined $10,000 for contempt of court." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Karoline did not flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, eyes locked firmly onto Judge Brooks, fully prepared for the battle she'd just provoked. Judge Brooks glared fiercely at Karoline, the courtroom buzzing with shock. His chest rose and fell visibly beneath the dark fabric of his judicial robe. The air was thick, charged with disbelief. Karoline stood firm, utterly composed amid the turmoil. Her sharp gaze pierced through Brooks's carefully constructed facade. "You have crossed a line today, Ms. Leavitt," Brooks growled quietly, his voice strained, a vein pulsing visibly in his temple. Karoline stepped forward, her heels clicking audibly against the marble floor. "No, Your Honor," she answered steadily. "I have just exposed it." He leaned forward slowly, attempting to intimidate her, his eyes darkening dangerously. "You are making baseless accusations against respected individuals. Do you realize the damage you're causing?" Karoline smiled faintly, unshaken. "The damage has already been done, Your Honor, not by me, but by those entrusted to uphold justice." A tense silence fell. Detective Hale shifted nervously in the witness box, eyes downcast, unwilling to meet the jury's piercing gaze. Reed sat frozen, sweat beginning to form at his temples, no longer able to hide behind his self-assured mask. "May I continue, Your Honor?" Karoline asked calmly, her voice echoing powerfully through the silence. Judge Brooks hesitated, visibly wrestling with his next move. "Be very careful, Counselor," he warned finally, attempting to reclaim authority. Karoline nodded slowly and deliberately and approached Hale again. Her steps echoed softly, heightening the sense of dread already permeating the courtroom. "Detective Hale," she began quietly, "would you like to reconsider your earlier testimony? Remember, you are under oath." Hale swallowed audibly, eyes darting toward Reed and then Brooks. His breathing quickened, his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I was instructed to sign those documents." Gasps rippled through the room, eyes widening in shock. Judge Brooks's hand jerked instinctively, nearly knocking over his water glass. Karoline pressed calmly but relentlessly. "Who instructed you, Detective?" Hale hesitated, terror flickering across his face. I received orders from Mr. Reed," he whispered, barely audible. The room erupted into gasps. Reed shot to his feet, panic and anger flashing across his features. "That's absurd!" he shouted desperately, but his words hung empty in the shocked silence. Judge Brooks hammered his gavel desperately, voice quivering. "Order! Detective Hale, you're aware of the gravity of your accusations." Hale, visibly shaken but resigned, nodded heavily. "Yes, Your Honor." Reed slammed his fist on the table, eyes blazing, voice trembling with desperation. "He's lying!" Karoline put him up to this. Brooks turned swiftly, glaring at Reed, voice dangerously low. "Sit down, Counselor." Karoline seized the moment, her words cutting through like a blade. "Judge Brooks, would you kindly explain your meeting with Mr. Reed last Thursday evening at Delaney's restaurant?" Brooks froze, eyes widening in disbelief. "How do you—" Karoline withdrew yet another file slowly, deliberately, sliding it toward the court clerk. "CCTV footage, Your Honor. You met Mr. Reed 2 nights before today's hearing, alone in private." Gasps filled the courtroom. Brooks's usually confident expression shattered completely, replaced by stark terror. Karoline continued mercilessly, voice calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, perhaps you can explain what compelled you, a judge, to privately meet the prosecutor handling my client's case right before today's trial?" Brooks remained frozen, unable to answer, as sweat trickled visibly down his temple. Reed stared at the table, defeated and speechless. Karoline stepped back slightly, allowing the evidence to echo in the stunned silence. Her gaze shifted slowly from Brooks to Reed, then returned squarely to the bench. Justice does not tolerate corruption. Brooks finally found his voice, barely audible, trembling. This cannot be happening." Karolina's gaze hardened. "The truth has a way of surfacing, Your Honor." Brooks swallowed visibly, gripping the gavel as though it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. He looked desperately toward the bailiff, who remained frozen, uncertain. Karoline took a final step forward, commanding attention. "You tried to bury justice beneath threats and fines, confident your authority would shield you, but truth always emerges, always." Brooks slumped back heavily in his chair, the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. The balance of power had just shifted irrevocably, and every person in that room knew it. Karoline Leavitt was not merely defending her client anymore, she had become a reckoning. Judge Brooks sat motionless, his authority stripped away, a defeated shadow of the powerful figure he had been hours earlier. His eyes, once full of confidence, stared blankly at the documents scattered in front of him, evidence of his downfall. Karoline stepped back slowly, her breathing steady. Her expression was neither triumphant nor arrogant, simply resolved. She straightened her files carefully, the gentle rustle echoing loudly in the heavy silence of the courtroom. Detective Hale sank deeper into his chair, head bowed, shoulders shaking gently in quiet resignation. Across the room, Marcus Reed's face was pale, eyes hollow with disbelief. His confident arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a reality he could no longer escape. Judge Brooks cleared his throat weakly, voice drained of its former strength. "In light of this new evidence, the court withdraws its previous ruling. Charges against Ms. Leavitt's client are dismissed immediately." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, but Karoline barely acknowledged them. She maintained eye contact with Brooks, offering no sympathy, only unwavering judgment. Brooks slowly rose, legs visibly trembling beneath his robe. His voice cracked slightly like a broken man facing inevitable consequences. "Furthermore, I hereby recuse myself from any further cases pending investigation." Without another word, he descended from the bench, avoiding all gazes as whispers intensified. Reed sat frozen, utterly defeated, the arrogance gone entirely from his now pale face. Karoline turned calmly, walking toward her client, who stared in disbelief, eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, voice gentle but firm. "Justice is never guaranteed. It must be fought for." Across the aisle, Brooks hesitated, looking back briefly, his pride utterly stripped away. Karoline caught his gaze once more, holding it firmly until he averted his eyes in shame. The audience began filing out quietly, each understanding they had witnessed something far greater than just a courtroom drama. They saw the undeniable strength of truth, how it dismantled even the most powerful illusions. Karoline collected her belongings, taking one last look at the emptying courtroom. Her voice resonated in quiet confidence, echoing softly. "Power built on deceit always collapses, but truth stands undefeated." As she left the courtroom behind, her words lingered powerfully, imprinting themselves into every mind, serving as a solemn reminder of one fundamental truth: justice prevails, not through authority, but through courage. Karoline Leavitt stood bravely against corruption. She showed that truth and justice have power beyond titles and beyond influence. Just like Karoline, you too have the power to support honesty and integrity. Stories like hers deserve to be heard, stories of bravery, courage, and unexpected victories against all odds. If you were moved by Karoline's fight for justice, help spread this message further. Press the like button below to let more people discover this story and inspire others to stand firm for what is right. If you believe in the power of real, powerful storytelling, if you appreciate narratives that reveal the hidden truths behind shocking events, then make sure to subscribe right now. By subscribing, you join a community that values justice, truth, and courage above all. Your support allows us to share more powerful stories, expose corruption, and celebrate heroes like Karoline Leavitt. So, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to ensure you never miss our next impactful video. We can spread awareness, uncover hidden truths, and inspire change. Justice is not passive, it demands action. Take action now, subscribe and like to become part of something bigger, because the fight for truth needs your voice.